In K-pop, there is a rule nobody writes down, but everyone understands. Smile politely, stay within concept, be powerful, but not too powerful. CL broke that rule before she even debuted. Long before she stood on stage screaming, "I am the best." Before the heavy eyeliner, before the global fashion weeks and American interviews, Lee Charin was just a kid moving between countries. Born in 1991 in Seoul, CL didn't grow up in one place. She spent years in Japan and France adapting to different cultures, different languages, different expectations. While other trainees memorized choreography in one studio, CL was learning how to exist in multiple worlds. That matters, because when you grow up constantly adjusting, you either shrink or you become adaptable. CL chose the second option. At 15, she auditioned for YG Entertainment, one of South Korea's biggest agencies. The rumor says she didn't just submit a tape and wait. She reportedly kept showing up, persistent, determined, slightly stubborn. If K-pop had a category called politely aggressive ambition, CL would have won it. When she finally debuted in 2009 as the leader of 2NE1, the industry didn't quite know what to do with them. They weren't the sweet, synchronized, doll-like idol group formula dominating the charts. They were loud. They were experimental. They wore bold outfits that looked like Fashion Week collided with a sci-fi movie. And CL wasn't just a member. She was the center of gravity. Charismatic, fierce, slightly intimidating. But here's the funny part. Offstage, CL was thoughtful, soft-spoken, observant. The baddest female persona was amplified confidence, but it wasn't fake. It was strategic. Songs like Fire and I Don't Care didn't just chart. They shifted the tone of girl groups. Then came 2011. I Am the Best. That wasn't just a title, it was a statement. At a time when female idols were often expected to be cute or elegant, CL stood on stage and declared superiority with unapologetic swagger. It was shocking, it was addictive, it was polarizing, and it worked. But here's the twist. Being the strongest in the room also means you become the most visible target. And visibility attracts pressure. Because while 2NE1 was dominating, the K-pop machine was already evolving. And evolution in that industry can be ruthless. CL was about to learn that being powerful on stage is one thing, maintaining power behind the scenes is another. And the next chapter of her story wouldn't be about dominance, it would be about survival. If part 1 was about domination, part 2 is about expansion. Because once 2NE1 exploded, they didn't just become successful, they became disruptive. In an industry full of synchronized smiles and carefully rehearsed innocence, 2NE1 looked like they had walked out of a fashion riot. Heavy eyeliner, experimental silhouettes, stage presence that felt less cute idol and more urban rebellion. And at the center of it all, CL. She wasn't just leading choreography, she was leading attitude. While other groups delivered polished sweetness, CL delivered controlled chaos. Her rap was sharp. Her confidence was deliberate. And she had something rare in K-pop at the time, international fluency. She spoke English comfortably. She understood Western pop culture. She carried herself like someone who knew she belonged on bigger stages, which is why when I Am the Best went viral years later in the West, especially after being featured in a Microsoft commercial, it felt inevitable. The world was slowly catching up to her energy. Then came fashion, Paris Fashion Week, front row seats, luxury brands. CL wasn't just attending, she was owning space. Designers noticed, editors noticed, cameras noticed. She didn't look like a typical K-pop idol. She looked like a global pop figure. And naturally, the next step seemed obvious. America. In 2014, CL signed with Scooter Braun, the same manager behind Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande. The headlines were immediate. CL goes global. K-pop's fiercest female rapper takes on the US. It sounded like destiny. Except destiny doesn't account for corporate delays. Songs were teased. Projects were hinted at. A debut album was announced. And then, silence. Months passed, then years. While fans waited, 2NE1's group activities slowed. Internal company shifts happened. YG Entertainment was changing direction. The K-pop industry was accelerating, and standing still is dangerous in that world. Then came the blow. In 2016, 2NE1 disbanded. No grand farewell tour, no long transition, just an announcement. For fans, it was heartbreak. For CL, it was something heavier. She had built her identity around leadership, around group chemistry, around shared rebellion. Now she was alone. And the American dream that once felt like expansion began to feel like isolation. The irony? The woman who once shouted, "I am the best," was now facing uncertainty behind closed doors. Was she too ahead of her time, too bold, too different for both markets? But here's the thing about CL. She doesn't shrink when things fall apart. She recalibrates. And the next phase of her career wouldn't be about proving she could lead a group. It would be about proving she could stand alone. And this time, no one would define the timeline but her. There is a moment in every powerful person's life when the spotlight turns off. Not because they failed, but because the system moved on. After 2NE1 officially disbanded in 2016, CL didn't just lose a group, she lost momentum. For years, she had been introduced as leader of 2NE1. Suddenly, that sentence ended mid-air. Her long-awaited US debut under Scooter Braun had stalled. Promises of albums dissolved into vague updates. Fans grew impatient. The industry grew louder. New groups debuted. Trends shifted. And CL? She was quiet. Too quiet. But silence doesn't mean surrender. Behind that silence was frustration. Years of unreleased music. Creative decisions she couldn't control. Delays that weren't hers to fix. Imagine knowing you have the material, the vision, the drive, but not the permission. That's not artistic failure. That's corporate paralysis. And for someone who built her identity on dominance, that kind of limitation hits hard. In 2019, CL made the move that changed everything. She left YG Entertainment. No dramatic press conference, no public meltdown, just a clean break. And suddenly the narrative shifted. For the first time since her teenage years, CL wasn't under a giant agency's structure. No more waiting for approval, no more soon, no more controlled rollout. She was independent. Now, independence sounds romantic. It is also terrifying. No safety net, no guaranteed promotions, no built-in machine pushing your name, just you and your music. She returned with In the Name of Love, a deeply personal project documenting her journey from trainee days to heartbreak to survival. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't trying to top I Am the Best. It was honest. Then came Alpha in 2021, her first full-length album. The title wasn't subtle. Alpha, not comeback, not reinvention. Alpha. It wasn't about reclaiming a throne. It was about reminding people she built one in the first place. The visuals were bold, the production was sharp, the attitude was intact. But something had changed. She didn't feel like she was competing anymore. She felt like she was self-assured. And here's the subtle power move. CL stopped trying to prove she could break America. She proved she could stand without needing it. She performed at Coachella in 2022, reuniting with 2NE1 on stage in a surprise moment that shook the crowd. It wasn't marketed, it wasn't teased, it just happened. And the internet exploded again. But this time, it wasn't viral absurdity, it was legacy. CL wasn't chasing trends. She was reminding the industry that she had shaped it, from leader to soloist to independent artist. The Queen didn't lose her crown, she rebuilt it. And now the question isn't whether CL can survive the industry. The question is whether the industry can keep up with someone who refuses to shrink. There's something funny about trends. They show up loudly, they dominate timelines, and then everyone forgets who started them. By the time fourth-generation girl groups began debuting with heavy beats, sharp choreography, darker styling, and the now famous girl crush energy, many fans treated it like a fresh concept. CL just raised an eyebrow because she had done it a decade earlier. Back in the 2NE1 era, being fierce wasn't the default for girl groups. Cute concepts ruled charts. Soft vocals and synchronized sweetness were safer bets. But CL stood on stage in leather, eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass, and declared dominance like it was a birthright. She wasn't trying to be adorable. She wasn't trying to be digestible. She was trying to be undeniable. And that blueprint didn't just influence K-pop, it influenced fashion. CL's relationship with global luxury brands wasn't accidental. She didn't become a fashion icon because she wore expensive clothes. She wore them like armor. At Paris Fashion Week, she wasn't K-pop guest number 4. She was CL, front row, photographed, recognized, not as a novelty, but as presence. That distinction matters because for years, Asian artists were often invited to global events as cultural add-ons. CL walked in like she owned stock. Her style wasn't minimal, it wasn't safe. It was exaggerated, bold, oversized, unapologetic. And somehow she made it look controlled. Fashion didn't soften her. It amplified her. But here's where it gets interesting. While her stage persona screamed alpha energy, her interviews revealed thoughtfulness, vulnerability, awareness of how much responsibility comes with visibility. She understood that being loud on stage didn't mean being reckless off it. And that's where the word icon starts to make sense. Because icons aren't just trendsetters, they are reference points. Many newer artists cite CL as inspiration, not just for music, but for confidence, for taking space, for rejecting the idea that women in pop must be palatable. She didn't just perform empowerment, she embodied autonomy, and autonomy in K-pop is rare. But perhaps the most ironic part of CL's journey is this. The industry that once didn't fully know what to do with her now benefits from the path she carved, the bold styling, the rap-heavy girl groups, the global crossover ambition. That road exists partly because she walked it first, and she didn't ask for permission, which raises the final question. What does legacy look like for someone who was always ahead? Because CL isn't just surviving anymore. She's stabilizing into something even more dangerous than hype, respect. There's something quietly revolutionary about a woman who refuses to shrink in an industry that profits from containment. CL was never designed to be digestible. From the moment she debuted, she didn't just perform, she occupied space. And space, especially in K-pop, is calculated. It's measured in choreography formations, camera time, brand deals, and public approval. Most artists are taught to fit inside a frame. CL widened the frame. When she stood at the center of 2NE1 shouting, "I am the best," it wasn't just a catchy hook, it was a cultural disruption. At a time when girl groups were still heavily boxed into cute or elegant concepts, CL projected dominance without apology. She rapped aggressively. She stared into cameras like they owed her money. She dressed like high fashion had been dipped in rebellion. And here's the key difference. It didn't feel borrowed. It felt owned. But ownership comes with cost. When 2NE1 disbanded, people expected the loudest member to fade the fastest. That's how the narrative usually goes. The bold one burns out. The controversial one becomes a footnote. The ambitious one gets labeled difficult. Instead, CL endured the most uncomfortable phase an artist can face: stillness. Years of delayed projects, unreleased songs. The slow realization that waiting for permission might mean waiting forever. She didn't launch into scandal or dramatic reinvention. She simply stepped out and began building independently. That move was not flashy. It was strategic. Independence in K-pop isn't romantic rebellion, it's logistical warfare. Funding, production, distribution all suddenly become personal responsibility. She took that risk, and when she returned with Alpha, it didn't scream desperation. It didn't beg the industry for validation. It sounded controlled, intentional, mature. The confidence wasn't louder, it was steadier. That shift matters. Early CL radiated explosive charisma. Later CL radiates command. There's a difference between being the storm and being the climate. And then came Coachella 2022. The surprise 2NE1 reunion wasn't just fan service, it was reclamation. Watching her walk on that stage wasn't nostalgic, it was affirming. The industry that once moved forward without her had to pause and acknowledge that the blueprint still stood. Because that's what CL became, a blueprint. Long before girl crush became a marketing term, she embodied it. Long before global crossover became strategic priority, she was already networking across continents. Long before idols were encouraged to openly own their creative direction, she was fighting for it. Many artists today benefit from doors she pushed open. And perhaps the most powerful part? She never softened to make the journey easier. She didn't dilute her rap tone to fit Western radio expectations. She didn't pivot into safe ballads to rebuild image. She didn't chase trends for algorithm approval. She stayed sharp, from teenage trainee to leader of a generation-defining group, to stalled soloist fighting corporate inertia, to independent artist commanding respect rather than hype. CL's story isn't about constant domination, it's about refusal. Refusal to be minimized, refusal to wait quietly, refusal to fit inside expectations built by someone else. And maybe that's the ultimate legacy. Not that she was the loudest in the room, but that she never once asked if she was allowed to be there. She walked in and stayed.